Oregon football's 2023 recruiting class has moved into the top 15 nationally on the 24/7 Sports composite rankings. We'll talk about their two latest verbal commitments and also what does it take to get some big fellas up front, because that is what Oregon needs most right now in next year's recruiting class. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster and lifelong Oregon Ducks fan. Thanks for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks, which is why, if you haven't already, you should like, comment, subscribe wherever you're listening to or watching the show. Thanks to everybody out there who has done so already. Our numbers keep going up. They look great. Keep it coming. I'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. They are the official recruiting sponsor here at the network, and we've got our official recruiting insider. I'm sorry, who are you again?
It starts with a J.
Jay,
Got
right.
that
I
there?
believe it
Yeah.
is John Garcia Jr. is his name, the director of recruiting for Sports Illustrated. It's been a minute, but this time it was my fault, not John's fault, that we haven't had him on in just a moment. So let's hop right into it. And I have a big picture question before we get into a couple of names. In your time covering recruiting, which has been extensive, that's why we keep bringing you on. Is recruiting offensive linemen different? Because to me, it seems like it might be a little different in that there isn't always an expectation that you're going to play right away. I think it's actually built in that you're not going to play right away. And you know, you see offensive linemen transfer out of a program now and then. Oregon had that happen this offseason, but I feel like it's not quite as common as the skill position guys because they're not expecting to get the ball anyway, and they just kind of have a realization of, yeah, I'm probably not going to be physically ready to play right away. Is that something that you see?
Absolutely, especially Spencer, as the game has modernized, right? It's gone a little bit more spread. So I think the body type of offensive linemen you recruit nowadays is totally different. We used to see when I first got in the business, these kids were heavier, right? You're bringing in a 325 pounder that you say, okay, maybe let's trim that back to 305, 310. Now you're getting these great athletes because look, you need tackles to block these smaller Von Miller kind of pass rushers that are lower to the ground. So your offensive tackles now, from a frame perspective, are 6'6, 260, 275. So now you're putting on the weight and trying to maintain the length and athleticism that allows them to combat these smaller, twitchier pass rushers that have become so prevalent in just about every defensive front that exists. So I do think that, yeah, overall, in either case, the offensive lineman is rarely physically ready to come in and compete at the Power Five level. So there is a different feel from a recruiting perspective in trying to court and sign ultimately one of these big time physically big players wherever they're from, and it's obviously less dramatic. It is less diva-ish, if that makes sense. The process is very much more cut and dry from the offensive line perspective. They usually get some offers, take some visits, and make a decision. And if it extends, it's because they don't know, or maybe they feel like they're on the fringe of adding a bigger offer or an offer, a dream offer, whatever it is. So it's really pretty cut and dry when you're recruiting offensive linemen. But in terms of the ability to win, it's really not as simple as some of those skill position players would make it seem. You hear a kid commit to Georgia or Ohio State, and they're just like, yeah, so much competition. They just threw 12 of these guys in the NFL at my position. It's so simple. Offensive line, you watch the NFL draft, and it's like Division 2, Division 3, FBS, G5. I mean, it's all over the place because, one, it's the hardest group of positions to project, and two, like what you said, the physical demand, it creates so much volatility, right? I mean, the projection is really hard to make because you don't know how a prospect is going to deal with adding 40 pounds or trimming 25 pounds. It's really hard to project. So it is really its own deal for just about every program out there. So not easy to win, but not easy to sell either, because it's really a long-term play for just about every offensive lineman out there.
And a great example of what you're talking about with the body type is the highest rated offensive lineman I think Oregon's ever had in Josh Connerly, right? He's
Right.
6'5" or so, but he's like 280 something.
Yep.
And we were talking about it when he committed about how, yeah, he's a really good athlete. He played basketball in high school. I feel like 10 years ago, you weren't going to have a lot of offensive linemen who were nimble and agile enough to play basketball. But Connerly now is a guy who you look at and go, yeah, he projects as a starting left tackle for several years at the Power Five and maybe the NFL level, but he does probably need to put on maybe 15 to 20 pounds. Whereas, like you said, a while back, it was the opposite, whereas a guy's
Mhm.
330 and we want to trim him down to the 315 range. Offensive line, I was talking about extensively yesterday on the show as it pertains to the Georgia game next week, which is ever closer, and I can't wait. I can't wait anymore. I need it to
Can
happen right now.
imagine.
I need it right now. Need all the college football right now, frankly. But
Amen.
the recruiting efforts continue for Dan Lanning, Adrian Clem, and the staff on the offensive line, because that's kind of the biggest position weakness in terms of maybe defensive line, but there's more players there. We'll talk about another one they could add in the coming months. But offensive line pursuits are pretty hot for the Ducks in that they're going after a number of guys because they don't have very many bodies at that position. I don't think they have any right now on the offensive line at this point in time. So one guy who's worthy of following and is in the Duck sights is Spencer Fano. So where does Oregon stand with him?
Probably in the best standing of the offensive linemen that are still uncommitted at this point. Obviously, a kid, who's already in that Pac-12 footprint, one who has taken several visits out to Oregon. There are a few other contenders in the race, but really, I think the combination of him extending the process into the fall, and like you said, Oregon having such a need there, really bodes positively for both parties. Relative to Oregon here. I do think this is not all but their race to lose, because look, it's a kid from Utah, so you never know with the Utes and BYU, that's always something that's it's really hard to go in there and win battles, right? There's just not a whole lot of examples of a lot of schools going into that state and winning big battles when both schools want the prospect, and they do with Spencer. But there's just always been this sense that he's willing to leave the state. There were other schools outside of that Pac-12 footprint that were getting involved at different points and felt good about their chances to potentially pull him out. But Oregon has been kind of the constant. Adrian Clem has been all over this kid, and I think that this is probably going to be the starting point of the offensive line class when Spencer's ready to make the call. Don't know if he's got some visits coming up that could potentially muddy the water a little bit, but as we sit in late August, I think most would consider this as Oregon's race to lose, which even to get in that position for a kid from Utah, I think is a really big deal.
Well, there's another offensive lineman that Oregon's been after for a good amount of time now that I'll ask John about after I remind you all that as you gear up for fall, you need the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn Jobs is here to make it easier to find the people you want to talk to faster and for free. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 810 million people. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn. George Kleofkov hoping he doesn't have to enter that category here in the next couple of years. But post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks again for making Locked On Ducks your first listen every day. The ultimate college football preview is here, a 7-episode preview with college experts, local team experts, and Odyssey college football insiders. It's everything you need to be ready for the college football season in one spot, which is right around the corner. Search for Ultimate College Football Preview on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's keep rolling here with John Garcia Jr., Director of Recruiting for Sports Illustrated, and another guy who Oregon is in the mix for, but his crystal balls are currently directing him elsewhere, is Logan Reichert, 4-star offensive lineman. Where does Oregon stand with him? Do they have a chance to maybe come in and swoop him away, or is he going to stay committed to the Missouri Tigers?
Yeah, he's a Missouri kid, right? So obviously, and look, That's the same issue with Missouri is that we see with Oregon. Like they really need guys up front. So when you've got one in your backyard that you're able to prioritize, and I would say reprioritize as this year has gone on, that's going to be generally tough to beat. You know, the SEC cell and all that on top of it. But look, Oregon has been in this race and stuck its head in this race the entire time to the point that that is the only other option. You know, Logan cut his list, I believe, late last week, and it's just Oregon and Mizzou. So either you stay home and you're a Tiger, or you go across the country into the Pac-12 and you become an Oregon Duck. They were the only two official visits he took, and really for the last, I would say month and a half, the only two schools he was really focused on. I was actually talking to him before he announced this final two and his commitment date, which is September 8th, by the way. And he was like, yeah, I'm announcing these two. I just don't know when. I think he was waiting on an edit to be made for him because, you know, it's important these days for the optics, I guess, with these
Of
prospects.
course.
But yeah, it was really just those two schools. You know, he was really excited to focus on those two. And then this morning, because I knew I was coming on with you, I touched base with him. I said, hey, privately, September 8th is the public date, but privately, do you know? And he said yes. So I know he took both visits, and that doesn't give a whole lot else away. But in terms of, you know, the thought of maybe the first weekend of the season having an impact or these late phone calls, we're not sure how much that will change his mind to whatever he's made up. It looks like he's good to go privately at this point, which probably pushes me towards the home state school. Just again, it's one of those where if you know, you'll know sooner if it's the in-state school, in my experience. So I think if he was like, look, man, I still have no idea. It's really up to these two, or we're going to see. I think you'd feel better about your chances from the Oregon perspective, which is why I think Fano is really important to land in this class because the two are built similarly. They're both, like we talked about, that newer build of offensive tackle. Very, very tall, very, very lean, very, very long, both well under 300 pounds. And I think that is where you want to start to build this offensive line class of 2023. And I think it's a good time to do it because not only do you need some bodies there, but now the season's going to begin. So you allow that group to who's on the bubble or on the margins to maybe be an Oregon target. You let them potentially play their way into that fold, and you allow Dan Lanning, who we know coming from that Kirby tree and his past, we know he's going to value that senior season evaluation. That's going to be important for every Duck class going forward. It is a staple of what Nick Saban originally built and what Kirby Smart, you know, started to build from that tree. The senior tape is the most important tape. A lot of other staff say the junior tape. This staff will be in that senior category. So you allow some of these offensive linemen, which again, height and weight wise, you have a little bit more time to bloom now. You let those seniors play up to that during the fall, which is, of course, either just begun or just about to begin relative to where these kids are located. So I do think there's still a lot ahead for Oregon on the hunt for offensive linemen. And then you don't ignore the junior college ranks as well, right? Obviously, great JUCO ball in California, which is always important for Oregon anyway. So you wonder if there's some potential targets in that regard and in those leagues out there as well. So still a lot in front of the Ducks from the offensive line perspective. But like you said, absolutely a need that they have to address.
I want to ask you about something you mentioned in there because I hadn't heard it before. You said that Saban and Kirby Smart come from the recruiting philosophy that you focus on the senior season tape more than the junior season. Is that the secret sauce to recruiting? Is that why they're just behemoths on the trail and they get high 4 and 5-star guys like they're nothing?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it. You know, obviously there's a whole lot of other resources and means to get those jobs done. But yeah, I do think that there's a group of coaches, and it's probably 60-40 maybe in favor of the junior tape. But I think there's a group of coaches that always want to be kind of looking ahead and looking forward to the next thing. So you're focused on 2024 and getting those early identifiers out in that class, or maybe just all in on the final piece of the 2023 puzzle. But a lot of these kids, conversely, especially nowadays in recruiting and now NIL's involved and all this other stuff, a lot of kids have a different mentality. You know, once they feel like they've arrived, if they feel like they've arrived in the Nick Saban camp and in the Kirby camp, you're out. I mean, you have not arrived because you are in high school. So I think in that regard, your senior season should be your best season. And when you see a drop off, which happens, I do think that it's just another red flag. So if that pairs with other data points that these staffs have built with these prospects on the negative side, they can get dropped. I mean, there's not a lot of schools that have that kind of power, but you can get dropped and be like, man, this four-star decommitted from Alabama and he committed to, Purdue. That doesn't look right. And sometimes, no disrespect to Jeff Brom and those guys, sometimes that is part of the conversation where, look, the updated evaluation did not match what we saw in 2021. It should at least match, if not exceed what we saw of you as a junior, because this is high school. You should be dominant. If you're playing at Oregon and Bama and Georgia, you should be dominant. And if the dominance decreases, especially at a position of physicality like in the front seven or a running back or whatever, it's a huge red flag for these coaching staff. So I just think it's a tribute to their philosophy, but also their staff and the amount of resources they have to check and truly update those evaluations, because it is very easy and human nature for a lot of these younger coaching staffs to just move on. We got him committed. Cool. We're done at offensive line. Let's look at the 2024 guys. Well, let's also refresh that evaluation of the 23 group, because it's still a long way before those guys see the field for your program. So I do think that's something that has lost some luster. It's not the sexiest thing and the funnest thing to talk about, but it's something that's very important in roster management, because you want guys who are continuing to get better at especially at this level, right? You need to see that improvement. So yeah, they really focus on that senior tape.
I just like it on the record. I don't think you can talk about recruiting at all without it being sexy and fun. I mean, who doesn't
Well,
love
for
recruit?
us, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I think for fans too, because recruiting is like a movie trailer preview. You're just selling hope and optimism, and you only, typically see the highlights. So you just see the good stuff and you think about
Mhm.
what it could be. And you have to wait until he arrives until you get to actually see the feature film. But it's just all hope, optimism, and upside on the recruiting trail for the most part. Some programs, like Arizona State, falling way down on the recruiting trail for various reasons, right? Then it's not. But if you're recruiting well, guys might not always pan out, but it is selling hope and optimism. And I don't know. To me, that's
I
sexy
like
and
I
fun
like the
here.
movie trailer thing. I might steal that at some point.
You're allowed to. I permit
Thank
you
you.
because you come on and give us such great content. Let's move to the defensive side of the ball. Amari Washington is kind of the next defensive line target for the Ducks. He's not, one of the three big fish that I've been talking about in Samuel Mpemba, David Hicks, and Mateo Uiagalelei, or that we've been talking about, I should say, right? Those are 3 5-star guys, and I would really like to see Oregon get one of them. I'll be a little disappointed with the staff that has been put together and the way that they have recruited at their past stops and whatnot if they're not able to get one of them. But the defensive line commits have started to come in. Terrence Green, we talked about him, and they've gotten another. Who did it? I'm blanking right now on the other 4-star defensive lineman that they just had.
Well, are they
His
projecting Mixon at D line, or is he going to
no,
be a
no, Mixon, no,
linebacker all the
Mixon,
way?
Mixon's at linebacker. There was another defensive lineman in there, and I just completely blanked on his name. I'll get it in a moment. But Amari
Gardner was
Washington,
early August.
Gardner, yeah,
Yep.
Gardner, McHale, yeah, three-star defensive lineman. Green's a 4. Amari Washington's a 4-star guy. What kind of player is he in Oregon? Where do they stand with him?
Yeah, another modern pass rusher, right? Again, we talked about the sizes of these guys changing, and this isn't your 285-pound strong side JJ Watt type of defensive end. This is a smaller, trimmer, twitchier player who's got the ability to put his hand in the dirt like those guys, or stand up and be a true edge prospect, which would be more in the Kayvon Thibodeau mold. He's not quite there as far as what we've seen thus far, but look, a national offer list and a true national recruit coming out of Arizona, and his Final Four reflects that. I think it's Oregon, Florida, LSU, Oklahoma. So spanning the
Yep.
entire country and multiple conferences in that light there as well. And this one's interesting because it has had some fluctuation. It was like it was going to be a final group, and then Florida kind of finagled its way into making it a Final Four as opposed to a Final Three. He had taken visits to other schools before that point that felt good about their chances, and then they were eliminated. So I think when you look at the fluctuation, a lot of times it makes you think, okay, all things scattered, all things centered, right? So the more they're crazy, the more they're going to kind of come back home at the end of the day. And the only school in the Pac-12 footprint for an Arizona native is obviously Oregon in this regard. So I do think in that regard, it's good news for the Ducks. Again, they've recruited the position successfully. We've talked at length about the the kind of landing Lupoi dichotomy, in that approach. Easy to sell those two with their track record and what they want Oregon to be here right out of the gates. So I do think, again, especially relative to the geography here, you feel good about Oregon's chances. I didn't get an update on the decision timeline, though. I do think with a kid like this, generally the sooner the better, because you don't know if he's going to take visits, more official visits, and really start to cloud the focus a little bit. But if he does elect to come off the board a little bit sooner, you feel better about the Ducks' chances. But even if he extends it, I do think they'll stay in the race all the way into the end. And like you said, they're building kind of this nice pass rusher class even before the quote unquote big fish come off the board. And I'll give you a little extra here, Spencer. If we had to rank those three on probability for Oregon, the big three, I'd go Uyangalele 1, Hicks 2, and Pemba 3. That can change, but that's how the order plays right now. I was actually DMing with Big Dave this morning, trying to see, hey, you got any visits for me? And they're flying somewhere, but it's for a high school game. I believe Bosco's playing Allen High School in Texas. So there you go. That's the latest from Big Dave
Gotcha.
himself. Yeah.
I love Big Dave. I'm a
Yeah.
huge Big Dave fan. I would take any of them, but I would love Mateo if not only to have Big Dave as a parent for
Like
the University
extra
of Oregon.
insider, just all access all the time kind of
Yeah,
kind of profile there. Yeah.
he's excellent. Let's move to Oregon football's latest verbal commitments in the class of 2023. One linebacker and one tight end. We'll stick with the defensive side of the ball for now and look at Jerry Mixon, the cousin of Joe Mixon, who's gone on to have a pretty respectable NFL career
Pretty
to this
good.
point. Yeah, he's pretty good. So maybe some good bloodlines here for Jerry Mixon. 3-star out of the state of California, if memory serves. What do you see with him? And this one was a little bit unexpected for
Yeah.
Oregon, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I remember when he committed, our sister site over at SI wrote the story and sent it to me, and I was like, Oregon. I didn't see that connection. But look, the more you look at him, you're like, oh, this is nice. This is a really nice get. And like you said, cousin of Joe, built like Joe, 6'2.5", 220 pounds, and like Joe, plays everywhere. In high school, I remember he was like the first big back that I was like, he like runs routes and catches the ball so well. And he was like Najee Harris's like mentor, and then Najee became that big back that catches the ball so well. And now here's Jerry Mixon doing those same things. I just saw scrimmage highlights where he was playing wide receiver and went up for 2 contested catches in the end zone and made them with ease. And I'm like, are we sure he's playing linebacker? But that's a great thing. That's a great problem to have from the Oregon perspective, because this is a do-it-all athlete. Tight end, wide receiver, running back, linebacker, defensive end. He does all of those things and does them to the point where he flashes at those positions. So again, just like with Joe Mixon and Najee Harris early on, in NorCal, there's not as many people in our business focused on those guys. So sometimes I do think there's the propensity to undervalue that crew. But when you're 6'2", 220, and you can play all those positions very, very well, you start to wonder, what are we missing here in this evaluation? And then you watch him where he's projected at linebacker, and it's even more fun because he is a dynamic downhill player who can arrive with some force. I mean, he's just a football player. I think that's probably his best positional fit. I think he can moonlight as a pass rusher, but he could also probably moonlight as an underneath coverage guy, because the range and ball skills that he shows on offense now tells us a different story about that ability. So I think he'll need to focus on one position to maximize that potential, but the frame, the athleticism, and certainly the bloodlines look really nice for the Ducks here. It looks like a really nice quote unquote under the radar find for this coaching staff.
And listed as a linebacker, but sounds like he should be listed as ATH athlete, because he can move around a little bit.
Should.
Never opposed to that. And I'm also not opposed to that if he is going to play linebacker, that he's got experience at other positions, because a lot of what makes a great football player on either side of the ball, but particularly on defense, is instinct. Right. And if you have an understanding of how route combinations work, or the way certain running plays develop, or what the running back is going to be looking for as the blocking unfolds, I think that can really be an advantage for a defensive player. It's why, quarterbacks can change positions and go play safety, because
Hmm.
what are you doing at safety? You're reading the offensive play. Well, what are you doing on at the quarterback position? You're reading the offense and the defense and seeing how it all comes together. I think that all makes a lot of sense. What about the other commitment, higher rated 4-star tight end Kenyan Sadiq out of the state of Idaho? You just don't get a lot of guys of that
Yeah,
caliber
true.
out of the state of Idaho, not going up against premier competition like, say, Mateo is down at St. John Bosco in the SoCal area, or even like Jerry Dickey has been the last couple of years in the NorCal area. But this is a guy who's got some physical tools, and this is a really important get for Oregon because they were looking at a couple tight ends during the recruiting process for the last couple months. They missed on them, right? Most notably Riley Williams, who probably would have come to Oregon had Mario Cristobal stayed, but he goes
Yeah.
with him down to Miami. And this is the first tight end in the class of 2023, and a good looking one from what I can tell for the Ducks.
Well, we just talked about it with Mixon. If you're projected to play one position, but we see you dominate and flash at others, if you are projected to play tight end and you're flashing and dominating as a split out wide receiver, that is exactly aligned with what the modern asks of the tight end position are. You want to be multiple and versatile. So he's got the frame at 6'4", 6'5" to add some mass and be that kind of balanced tight end where he's in line, he's split out, he's in the slot, he's the H back, he's kind of lining up everywhere because look, tight ends are your fullbacks of the present now anyway. But on the surface level right now, you see dominance at the catch point and at the apex, which means he's got some bounce to him. I hadn't checked if he's a basketball player as well, but this is a windmill dunk kind of guy with the bounce that Sadiq shows on the football field. So I'm a big fan of that. And like you said, he's from Idaho where you don't typically get the greatest competition. So what do we ask? What do we ask when you're playing low-level football or private school ball in some of these states? Dominate. Go dominate. And with Sadiq's offense, it looks like sometimes, and I don't blame the coaches here, sometimes the plan is, hey, go ahead and run that 9 route. We'll just tell the defense, hey, you're going to run this 9 route, Sadiq. All right, you're good. This side, bet, stay there. And even if the defense knows it's coming, it doesn't matter because 6'4", 6'5" with bounce, ball skills, and the tracking ability is still too much. So you can either out rebound the defensive back or out jump the defensive back with that great frame. And that's really where it becomes intriguing. There's even one play where he's getting just harassed, a pass interference and a half, if you will, still comes down with the football. So there is this combination of length, body control, awareness, and the ability to track and finish at the catch point that's really impressive. Does that mean he's got room to improve in his route concepts and leverage and coming in and out of his breaks and all that stuff? Yes, absolutely. But again, if you're a tight end, you're going to put some weight on him on top of that. So I just think this is a raw upside type of pick for the Ducks. But if you think of what Kenny Dillingham wants to do, totally modern, right? I mean, you want your tight end to move around and kind of go nuts. I think Trey McKinney was the tight end at Florida State, who was a kind of a tweener size wise, but he lined up in the backfield as a wing, split out, attached, and really did damage. I think he's still in the NFL at this point, and he was not projected as such when he was in college. So this is the type of gadget athlete that you can present as a tight end right now from a physical perspective, but then you could also build him into more of a conventional tight end. But those physical skills with the ball in the air are undeniable. And when we talk about basketball on grass, that's a lot of what it's about. 50-50 balls and the back shoulder. It's positioning more than precision at this point. And these are the type of players that win in those margins come Saturday. So I really like this get.
I was talking about instincts for players on the field earlier, but how about your instincts, John? A three-sport athlete is Kenyan Siddique. He does play
I knew it.
basketball, also runs track, and in the 100-meter dash, just a hair over 11 seconds, which is
Unreal.
not not bad for a guy who projects as tight end. Also worthy of note for Duck fans. This is a guy who can play wide receiver straight up and is not traditionally a tight end, right? He's not the
Mhm.
Maliki Matavau mold, who's just kind of big, bruising, like almost closer to offensive lineman than wide receiver. Terence Ferguson, who I think could be an explosive player this year in Oregon's offense, and I like a lot. He was the same way. He did not play tight end really in high school, hardly at all. He was mostly a wide receiver, but he came to school. He bulked up a little bit, and now I think he looks really, really good. And our shows always bulk up in the best way when we get John Garcia Jr., Director of Recruiting for Sports Illustrated. John, appreciate the insight as always. Good to have you back.
Always a pleasure to be on with you, Spencer. Take care, boss.
I appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.